Just 2 weeks to go until the finish line in an interminably long campaign. Nevertheless, we are pleased to welcome the leader of the NDP to our studios. Here's Thomas Mulcair. It's great to have you here again.
Hi, Steve.
Let us just, because this is so much the news of the day, start with the TransPacific Partnership. Have you had any kind of briefing at all about what's in this thing?
Yes, we were fully briefed this morning by the senior officials in Ottawa. And I just caught the Prime Minister's press conference. And we're going to be opposing it. There's a sellout of our auto sector in particular. There are already 400,000 well-paid manufacturing jobs that have been lost on Stephen Harper's watch. There are 300,000 more unemployed today than when the last recession hit in 2008. Mr. Harper's plan has failed. As Prime Minister, he has the worst job creation record since the Second World War. Now he's putting at risk 80,000 more manufacturing jobs, most of them here in Ontario. We're going to fight this thing.
Can you really rip up a deal that has been at least 5 years in the making and, may very well, if he wins, he'll presumably have the right to bring this in?
Well, we have every intention of replacing him precisely because of this sort of mistake. It's an ideological approach. He told our dairy industries, the family farms here in Ontario, in the Southwest, we've met lots of those farming families. A lot of them have had those farms and their families for generations. That's being put at risk. There was no reason to sacrifice any part of our supply management system. Between the European deal and this deal, they're sacrificing a full 5% of the market.
Well, he says 3.25. He says
it's
they're allowed
3.25 plus what they have already thrown in the European deal. And now they're promising compensation. Well, here's what happens when Stephen Harper promises compensation. Ask any fisher in Newfoundland and Labrador. He promised compensation to them because to sign the European deal, they gave up their compulsory rules for transforming and processing in Newfoundland and Labrador. It was 300 million plus on the table. Mr. Harper has not respected the deal. So that's Stephen Harper. He'll promise stuff to get these deals through, and then he'll just let everybody go.
Is this a free trade election now?
It is. It's going to be one of the things that allows people to concentrate on Stephen Harper's record. I mean, that's what this election is about, Stephen Harper's record. He has an abysmal record when it comes to jobs. And it's not just the NDP that said that, Steve. The CIBC, one of Canada's largest chartered banks, put out a report just a couple of months ago saying that the quality of jobs being created today was the worst in a full generation. Here in the GTA, more than half of families can no longer rely on one single full-time permanent job. The jobs that are being created that Mr. Harper likes to boast about are mostly part-time, precarious, low-paid jobs. That's the reality of today. Mom and dad crisscrossing each other with no hope. Well, with the NDP, there is hope. We're going to bring in $15 an hour, $15 a day childcare.
Hold that thought, because I got the whole platform here.
There we go.
Well, I shouldn't say the whole thing. Let's bring this up if we can, Sheldon. Here are the bullet points of what the NDP has on offer in this campaign, starting with creating 1 million $15 a day childcare spaces in every corner of Canada over the next 10 years, legislating a $15 an hour minimum wage job for jobs in the federally regulated sector, raising the corporate income tax to 17% from 15%, reducing the small business tax from 9% to 9% from 11%, investing $1.3 billion a year for 20 years in public transit, returning the age of eligibility for old age security to 65 from 67, and creating a national pharmacare program. Those are the major highlights. I just want to start with this. What do you think Canada's biggest problem is at the moment?
I'd say inequality. As a social democrat, I've always made it my priority to remove inequality in our society and to try to create opportunity. I would also add that the biggest inequality in our society today is between generations. That's why we have a very different approach from the Conservatives and the Liberals. The Conservatives have added $150 billion in economic debt on the backs of future generations, but that's on top of the huge ecological debt that they're leaving them as well because they're not cleaning up and not making polluters pay for the pollution they create. Mr. Trudeau has a plan to spend tens of billions of dollars on the backs of future generations as well. You know that the NDP has a proud track record of being very responsible managers. Tommy Douglas balanced Saskatchewan's budget 17 times in a row and then brought in universal free public medical care. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep the budget balanced, but we will bring in maximum $15 a day quality childcare. We will make sure that there's a $15 an hour federal minimum wage, as not only that will help give a raise to 100,000 workers, but it's also going to be a strong signal. It'll be leadership for the provinces to do like Rachel Notley's NDP government is doing now in Alberta, raising their minimum wage to $15 an hour. You know, Steve, I don't accept that in a country as rich as Canada that somebody should work full-time and live in poverty. No more than I accept that we have hundreds of thousands of children going to school in the morning without having eaten. We have a specific plan to get rid of the CEO stock option tax loophole, take those $500 million and apply it to taking those kids and their families out of poverty. I don't accept that hundreds of thousands of people who built this country, our seniors, should be living in poverty. We have a very clearly costed plan to invest in the guaranteed income supplement for them. And I don't accept that our First Nations and very often Inuit and Métis people are living in abject third world conditions with food insecurity and horrible housing and not even proper drinking water. We're going to fix that. We're going to create a nation-to-nation approach.
I've listened carefully to the answer to the balanced budget question in the past, and I think what you've usually said, you didn't say it this time, but what you usually said is our first budget will be balanced. Does that suggest that not every budget in a Mulcair-led government would be balanced over the course of the term?
I have a proud track record of 35 years of public administration. I've occupied very high-level jobs prior to being elected. I was elected, and I've been elected for more than 20 years after that. And I spent several years around the cabinet table, so I know what it's like to make those tough decisions.
So come hell or high water, every budget will be balanced.
Well, in 2008, when a worldwide recession, the worst since the 1930s, hit, we were the first to demand that the government recognize the gravity of the situation and start spending to stimulate the economy.
Short of another great recession, though.
I think that as a general rule, governments have an obligation to balance budgets, unless we're in exceptional times that require that sort of stimulus spending.
Okay. I read this over the summer. This is your autobiography.
It is.
The Strength of Conviction, as it's called. And learned a lot about your background. For example, I think a lot of people in Ontario don't know that for a guy who's one of 10 kids growing up in hardscrabble Quebec, you're kind of Quebec royalty in some respects, descended from 3 premiers, I find out.
Yes.
Beyond that, though, I do want to spend a little time here giving the voters a chance to just get a sense of who you are. And one of the most interesting stories in your background is you and your wife met, is it 41 years ago now? You were a kid of 19 at the time?
Yes, exactly.
You're Catholic, she's Jewish.
Yes.
The child of Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
And I wonder, were there any issues amongst your broader family when this Catholic kid and this Jewish kid get together all these years ago?
Well, it helped that my parents immediately fell madly in love with Catherine. Catherine's grandmother was a little bit less thrilled because at the time you didn't really have civil marriages in Quebec. They were very few and far between. But our parish priest was away. He was being replaced by a Cistercian monks for some holidays during the summer, who understood the sensitivity, and he said, it was the only place, it was the same church where my parents got married, where our son got married. And he said, we're going to have a marriage here in the church, but for all intents and purposes, it will be a civil marriage because we won't say the Mass. So Catherine's grandmother was relieved at that. She went to the marriage. Everybody found, was happy with that. And yeah, very different backgrounds, but I think that both of us, Catherine even more than me, because I think of what her family's been through, Catherine is incredibly sensitive to other people, other cultures, other religions. She's the type of person who will immediately react if she hears a statement or even a joke that's supposed to be funny on the backs of another race, religion, or whatever. So both of us were raised that way, to be very sensitive and respectful, and it carries through in what we do. One
of the things I also learned in your book was that your time in Quebec politics ended not great, right? You had a fairly stormy relationship by the end of it with Jean Charest, who was the premier of the day. You don't put a lot of detail in the book about how it's been well documented. What happened was, essentially, I was being pushed hard to sign an order in council that would have transferred lands in a provincial park to private developers. You were the environment minister. I was the environment minister, and I steadfastly refused to sign the order in council. They said, okay, we know, we'll go to the rule book, we know what to do in this case, we'll take this guy, we'll take him out of environment, we'll put somebody in who's a bit more pliant. And interestingly enough, and this is also on the public record, the very first thing that was adopted by cabinet after I quit, because I quit rather than do that, the very first thing adopted was the transfer of lands in a provincial park to private developers for condos. But it raised such a storm in Quebec that they eventually had to back down. So I'm proud of that. But that's the career that I've had. I've stood on principle a few times. When I was the chair of the very large regulatory agency in charge of all professions in Quebec, I had to stand my ground in the face of a very powerful president of the Quebec College of Physicians and Surgeons who was not doing his job of taking care of cases involving allegations of sexual misconduct by doctors. So the board that I chaired came in foursquare in favor of my position and said, we're going to take on the College of Physicians and Surgeons. We changed the law, but we also changed the culture around investigating this type of complaint, and it's held ever since. You won't be surprised to hear that's one interpretation of things. Others have had a different interpretation, which is Tom Mulcair can't get along with anybody. Tom Mulcair's too autocratic. Tom Mulcair insists that if you don't do it his way, it's, the highway. Yeah. Why would people be wrong to come to that, to draw that inference instead?
I think the best calling card that I have in answer to that, because of course, you have to have a strong character and be passionate when you do these jobs. And we go after these functions, Steve, because all the easy stuff's already been done. But my best calling card is that the people around me have all been with me for 10, 12, 14 years. Everybody who's worked with me remains fiercely loyal, and I remain fiercely loyal to them. I think that that's also the mark of someone who is passionate, but who knows how to keep his priorities. My priority has been to be loyal to the people around me, but also to be loyal to the mandate that I was given. When I was at the office, the Quebec Professions Board, my mandate was public protection, and I took it seriously. When I was Environment Minister, it was the protection of the environment, and I took it seriously. And if on the October 19th, people make me the Prime Minister, taking care of the average family, because I come from an average family, as you mentioned, of 10 kids. We did go through rough times in our lives, but I'm going to think of families, average Canadian families, every time I take a decision.
I'm not sure you're going to get this guy's vote, but Conrad Black wrote about you in the Weekend National Post. I don't know if you saw it, but here's
No,
what
I don't get a chance to read Conrad Black.
You don't read
very
Conrad
often.
Black? Well, he's an excellent writer. You might want to take a look sometime. Anyway, here's what he had to say. Mulcair has been strong in Parliament and is perfectly presentable in person, but on the hustings he has seemed flaccid, elderly, and unstylishly hirsute. Barring an astonishing turn in the next 2 weeks, the Conservatives and NDP will both slip significantly from their performance in 2011. Why is it after 9 weeks of campaigning, which, as I pointed out in the intro, is an interminably long time for people to pay attention to a political election campaign, why are the numbers for your party lower now than they were when the campaign started?
Well, we're actually in our 12th week of campaigning, but if I want to talk about the energy of this campaign, yesterday we started off in Brantford and we went into Waterloo and we went from there to Stratford, went to London, went to Sarnia, and then we went to Essex. And along the way, we had thousands and thousands of Canadians in southwestern Ontario come out for our events. They were applauding the fact that the NDP was standing up with proposals that they wanted to hear about. $15 a day childcare, a $15 an hour federal minimum wage. They know that in this election, that if we have confidence in ourselves, we can actually get change for the first time in 150 years. For 150 years, Steve, Canadians have been told that we only have an alternative between the old line Liberals and the old line Conservatives. Got tired of the sponsorship scandal? No problem, go back to the Conservatives. Tired of Mike Duffy and the Senate scandal? No problem. Well, this time, there is an alternative, and people are starting to have that confidence. But it takes a while to get people to change a habit. We are in the habit of alternating between the two old line parties, but for the first time in Canadian history, the NDP is the official opposition. And on key issues like Bill C-51, which seriously affects our rights and freedoms, on key issues like tax giveaways for Canada's richest corporations, Stephen Harper, Justin Trudeau, same approach. They're both in favor of the Keystone XL pipeline that's opposed by all progressives, and including Hillary Clinton in the States. And when the Americans are opposed to it, somehow Justin Trudeau and Stephen Harper are in favor of it. They're both going to be in favor of the TransPacific Partnership, which is going to gravely affect tens of thousands of working families in this country. So it's about time that there was a champion for manufacturing in Canada. It's about time there was a champion for the average Canadian middle-class family who's going to think of those families, because he's lived that, and that's where I come from, every time he takes a decision.
I want to get into a bit of discussion about this values debate, so-called. Honorable people can disagree on the issues that have been, I guess, a bit of a feature of the campaign as of the last week. So let me ask you this. Do you doubt Stephen Harper's sincerity when he says, if you want to swear a citizenship oath in this country, we got to see your face?
I do doubt his sincerity on that, and I'll tell you why. He's trying to hide his record behind the niqab. And he doesn't want us to talk about his record, and he actually has the temerity to try to couch it in terms of women's rights. So let's take a minute to look at Stephen Harper's record on women's rights. We can start with this campaign. Stephen Harper's Conservatives are running exactly 20% women, one candidate in 5 in 2015. 43% of the NDP's candidates are women. We got the highest number of women elected to Parliament, percentage for any party in the history of the Parliament of Canada in 2011, and we're going to repeat that in this election. Mr. Harper's backbenchers have tried time and again to reopen the abortion debate.
And he hasn't let them. In fairness, he hasn't let them.
Fair enough. But they're about that, and that's the signal they're sending. But he's also shut down a program for women's shelters. He shut down the status of women offices across Canada. That's his track record on women's rights. So this has nothing to do with that. This has everything to do with trying to hide the fact that 400,000 manufacturing jobs were lost, that there are 300,000 more unemployed today. The other thing is too, Steve, and I firmly believe this, that you're not allowed to use identity issues to divide Canadians one against the other. We're talking about precisely 2 cases out of 680,000 people. So this is what Mr. Harper's been playing as a game, and I find it an irresponsible and dangerous game for a Prime Minister to play.
I hear you, but you know, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it from some of your candidates running in the province of Quebec in particular, that they are very torn on this. They are very uncomfortable going against minority rights. On the same token, they're not pleased with the whole niqab issue. They just think it's not right.
Once the courts have ruled, it's not a question anymore of what you like and what you don't like. It's a question of respecting what the courts have ruled on. But beyond that, I think that a Prime Minister is somebody who has to bring everybody in the country together, tries to find the things that unite us, not to try to pick at the things that they know might be able to divide us.
Do you think he's pushing a xenophobic agenda for political purposes?
Well, I'll look at the facts. The fact is, one of Stephen Harper's backbenchers has said that Muslim women should get the hell back where they came from, and Mr. Harper signed his nomination papers. He has another backbencher who said that the problem is that brown people are taking white people's jobs. Mr. Harper signed his nomination papers. When President Obama talks about the need to fight against radicalization, he says we have to work with houses of worship. Mr. Harper singles out mosques. He said we're going to work, make sure we go into mosques. So he is singling out a single religious community. There's no doubt in my mind about that. You asked at the beginning whether I thought he was sincere. I do believe that Stephen Harper has some values, but Stephen Harper's had 10 years to find a solution to that problem, if it really was one. The problem that represents precisely 2 women out of the 680,000 people who have become citizens in the past 4 years. 2 people. So if Mr. Harper had really wanted to do something about that big problem he's discovered, he had 10 years to do it. But he hasn't done anything about it. So therefore, Canadians are allowed to ask themselves, why is he raising that now? And I think that's a legitimate question.
I get you, but as you well know, it's often not the billion-dollar problem that gets people, it's the $15 glass of orange juice that gets people. So even though it's 2 out of hundreds of thousands, it pushes people's buttons, including some of your own candidates. You'll acknowledge that.
Oh,
yes?
Because they're very sensitive to it, and I understand that sensitivity fully. But at that stage, it's no longer a question of what you like or you don't like once the courts have ruled.
Okay, let's finish up on this then. Much of the campaign, I think you'll agree, has been you and Justin Trudeau both trying to sort of establish yourselves as the, if you don't want Harper, we're the better alternative. And certainly most of the press releases I get are you against him or Trudeau against you. And we've seen in all of the leaders' debates as well that the 2 of you spend, if not as much, maybe more time attacking each other than you do Stephen Harper. And I'm wondering if on the 19th of October, Stephen Harper wins because you 2 beat each other up so much and he got, therefore, a quote-unquote bit of a free ride to the finish line. How are you going to explain that to the 70% of progressive voters in this country who apparently want to see somebody else as Prime Minister?
Well, Steve, I have to say that anybody who thinks that I've been giving Stephen Harper a free ride hasn't attended too many question periods over the past 4 years. I've been the only leader of the official opposition that he's ever really faced who's taken him on. You remember what he did to Stéphane Dion. You remember what he did to Michael Ignatieff.
I'll grant you that, but that was in the House of Commons.
Well, the same thing has happened during this campaign. Go back to last Friday's debate. I mean, it was a slugfest between Mr. Harper and me. So anybody who took a few minutes to look at that debate would confirm what I just said.
That was the French debate, though.
It actually took place, though. Even though it took place in French, it actually took place, Steve. I have to inform you.
Fair enough.
And I know you speak fluent French, so you were able to follow it.
Je ne suis pas bilingue, mais je sais, monsieur.
But I do know that Canadians understand that my job is to take on Stephen Harper. I have to defeat him, and I have the plan to start repairing the damage that he's done. It is true that we live in a country that for 150 years has had the habit. It's ingrained. You get tired of one, you go back to the other. So we're imposing ourselves in that conversation, and we're doing strongly. It's the first time in the NDP's history that I can look you in the eye and look Canadian voters in the eye and say, we have a real legitimate chance of forming a progressive government in this country. I have the confidence that we have the plan and the team to do that successfully. I'm also trying to communicate to Canadians that they have to have confidence in themselves, that we can go beyond the 2 old line parties. And when I do point out the fact that on key environmental, social, and economic issues, Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau have the exact same position, whether it's C-51, corporate tax giveaways, or environmental issues like Keystone, they're of one mind. And they're going to both back this TPP trade deal. We're going to say enough is enough. You've got to stop destroying good jobs in our communities. You've got to stop going after family farms. You've got to start giving people a break, start working to reduce inequality in our society. I'm going to continue to work as I did this week to improve the lives in the North with a food program that gets rid of the 30% in food insecurity up there. We're going to start taking care of housing in our First Nations and other communities. That's what we're going to do, Steve. We're sincere about this. We've got a clear plan to do it. I have the experience to defeat Stephen Harper and the plan to repair the damage he's done.
Last question. If there's no majority government on October 19th, have you and Justin Trudeau or any of your people and any of the Liberal people had formal or informal conversations about what you intend to do on the 20th of October?
The Liberals and the NDP had very formal discussions when they were the official opposition in 2008. Jack Layton
I mean
was
this
there.
time, I know.
Oh,
What about this time?
I'm going to answer your question. I was part of that process where we wrote a very formal coalition deal. The Liberals lifted up their noses on their own signature. You remember Michael Ignatieff saying that they were going to do it alone. 7 years later, we're still stuck with Stephen Harper because of the Liberals. I have opened the door to Justin Trudeau on at least 4 separate occasions, most recently in July of this year. He takes it upon himself to personally slam the door every time the NDP has opened that door. So progressives, people who want change, have to know that the party that's always shown openness to working with others is the NDP, and I've maintained that the whole time I was leader.
Mr. Mulcair, I've got 1,000 more questions and no time left to ask them. But we're grateful you spared some time from the campaign trail to come in at TVO tonight and answer our questions.
Good
Thanks
to
very
see
much.
you. All the best, Steve.
Thomas Mulcair, leader of the NDP.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.